I've got a few new people here. If you haven't already, we have a newsletter, email sign-up sheet back there. So try to leave an email address on there before you leave if you don't like to use Meetup or any of the other things. Apparently, I'm the only one that's going to talk about 3.7 stuff today. Chris was going to do some of the other topics, but he's had to go out of town. This is not going to be an entire 2-hour presentation. It's going to be more like, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes, but feel free to hang out afterwards, ask questions. Next month, we're having a Python 101 workshop. So if you know anyone that wants to get started or has never done Python before or still learning, spread the word. We'll have a bunch of USB sticks with Anaconda Python distribution on it, and we'll basically spend the entire meetup making sure everyone has Python installed on their computer, and we'll try to give out some information about where to get more resources, some sites to follow, books you may be interested in, conferences to attend, and whatnot. So, all right, I guess I'll get started. So has anyone in here started using 3.7, Python 3.7 yet? Other than Alex?
We're using it.
Okay.
I mean, not anything specific to it.
Amazon Mix 2 images now come with Python 7 as a default.
Okay.
Yeah. So
everybody was waiting on that, and then they'll start using Python.
They're kind of pushing everybody forward with what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay. So there's realpython.com has a really good article. If you haven't read that yet, I would suggest going there first. They talk, and there's some performance improvements overall for this latest version compared to previous versions. And there's a few few additions to the standard library as well. I'll go over a couple of those things today. Mainly, there's a version of the class objects called data class, and I thought I'd just kind of start from classes and go through some of the things like NameTuples, and then get to data class to kind of show a comparison on of the data class compared to these other classic object types. So standard class object in Python is just class, name of the class, and you can give it attributes. This example here, just give it a name, age, and you can initialize it with those variables, and you can do all kinds of, you can give the class methods, give it a, use this REPR, representative method is what I call it, or string method, to where when you run the class, like in IPython or Jupyter Notebook in this case, it'll give you a nice printout in the console of that class. Also, I think it was in 3.6, you can do type hints now for variables. I think you have to right now use something like MyPy and something else to actually really take advantage of that. And PyCharm, the latest version of PyCharm, will actually recognize things like type hints and give you warnings, or if you try to like initialize the name attribute with a number, for example, it warn you about that.
But that's not new in 3.7, right?
No, I'm just kind of building to the data class stuff. But typically, I think that came around in 3.6. But usually you just list your attributes or just initialize them without giving the type. So you get your attributes with your dot syntax here. And now classes, even after they've been initialized or created, that same instance of the class, you can change the attributes. So right here, the name is Homer. I think that's his age. I don't know. Then using that same instance, you can change the name and age that same object. Then I mentioned the type hints. When you're using type hints, you can also declare them in the init method as well, instead of doing something like this up here. So name tuples. Yeah.
So if I understand well, from here, in 2.7, there were no clusters whatsoever, and then they were introduced in 3.7.
In Python 2.7?
Yeah.
The class has always been a part of Python.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's all. That's all. The only properties is just what you have shown us now. They don't inherit. They don't do anything like in C++. Yeah. It's not like object-oriented classes.
It is. This is just not inheriting from anything. This is sort of like inheriting from the base class.
Yeah, you could subclass this, for example. You could have maybe a vehicle class and then have another class called car that would subclass the vehicle, and it would take on you could have the attributes of that vehicle class and the car class. So that's what you're thinking of.
Yeah, the only real difference is you can't really protect.
Yeah.
There's not like private variables versus public stuff like that.
Concept like in class and the kind of things you can do them with C++ is a little wide. So here, what I'm trying to like maybe analogy. This is like a struct in C++.
Okay.
No, I mean it inherits, right? So you have a vehicle class and it's got whatever an engine variable, a subclass that every subclass would have that. It's very similar. It's not as strict, but the inheritance, the objects, it's all.
Yeah.
The syntax is slightly different in 2.7, but it's pretty much the same.
We could do some examples later after all this to get more into it. So name tuples. There's a type in the Python type called tuple. There's like list, dictionary, string, stuff like that. So a name tuple is subclass of a tuple. And think of it as kind of a immutable class, I guess. Just declare what you want the name of your tuple to be, and fields are what they're called. You can think of these as like attributes for the class object, and you just initialize it. You see here, and it automatically. You don't have to. Like the class up here, I had to say how I wanted it to print out to the console. And the name tuple, for example, it kind of takes care of that for you when you show it in the console. It gives you this nice representation of the tuple, and you can get to the attributes in a similar way as with the class object. And then name the tuple. This is up here is function, whereas this is type the version of the name tuple. You declare it similar to the class I showed previously, and it supports the type hints as you see here.
Is that new?
Name tuple.
Yeah,
Not
the class version of NameTuple.
Yeah, I think it came out in 3.4 or something like that.
But is the type new?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's clear at the data class, but this is all kind of building up to this data class object. I expect that maybe the data class will just eventually replace these other things showing. But the difference between these tuple approaches and the class is once you create a name tuple, you can't go back and change its values that you give it. It's like if I ran this right here, you know, it'll blow up saying can't change that because this is a tuple. And it is weird about, so I don't, yeah, so if you don't give it the type hints, it won't create your init and the representation method, for example. So if, you know, right here I gave it the type hints, it's nice and pretty when it prints out. Without the type hints, it's just, you know, it's just saying this is a person object.
So the name tuple is requiring you to pass the parameter names. We call it name equals Lisa, age equals 16.
Yeah, when you initialize it, create it. But what I was trying to get at here, though, was if you don't give it those type hints, and it's if you're just looking at it in your session where you're running, you would have to then go back and create a string method or the REPR method to get a better printout of it in the console. So like up here, for the class, I mean, you don't have to do this, but it's kind of nice. You know, if you want information about that object, you print out. So in the name tuple down there, if you don't give it the type hints, you have to give it this record method to get a good, nice, readable printout.
So that last example there, why is that an error?
Yeah, so it's like I can initialize it, see, or like right here. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. So right here, I declare default values for the fields.
Oh, I see.
And then I change those defaults right here. But I don't know why, but if you don't give it those type hints and try to initialize it with something other than defaults, it'll blow up on you. It is just something I thought might want to be aware of when I was playing around with this. I was like, well, why is this not working? I just did this in the previous example, and it's because the type hints weren't in it. So lastly, for this stuff, so like I said, the data class is pretty much a combination of the name tuples and the classic class object I showed previously. It's you import it from the data classes module, and one of the nice things about it, it prevents you from having to these methods right here. You get those for free. You don't have to. So which can be a lot of boilerplate if you have a bunch of class attributes and a lot more complicated classes. You'd have to keep creating your init methods and how you want it to print to the console and whatnot. And the data class takes care of all that for you. So all it is it's just your typical class syntax with the @data class decorator at the top here, and you just initialize it similar to a class. You can also initialize it with the names of the attributes as well. You get to the values the same way as a class. You it's immutable, just like a class, not like a name tuple. I mean, it's mutable. You can change the values like a class, unlike the name tuple, which is immutable. So once it's been created, you can still change the underlying values, but you can make it immutable. You give the data class decorator this parameter called frozen, set that to true, and so this is basically a named tuple now. So as you can see, if I try to run that, try to change something in this immutable version, it'll give you some red and errors and complaining. So that was my whirlwind take of the data class. There's a ton of stuff, and I'm kind of like, well, just go to the real Python article, and they have a 30-minute read on just the data class itself. Tons of stuff about it. You can, one of the other things I didn't show on here, but it does support there's a meta field for your class attributes, which is sort of like a doc string for the attributes. So when you print out the class, when you do like right here, if you did p.name, if you did like p.name meta, it'd give you a description of the attribute of that class based on your meta string that you define in where you define the class at. So the next thing, this is a lot shorter. Breakpoints. This is a new function in Python 3.7. If you're familiar with the default Python debugger, which is PDB, there's also a flavor of it called IPDB, which is IPython debugger. And the way you would pre-Python 3.7 use that in your code would be you would import PDB somewhere at the top, and then wherever you want breakpoints within your script, you declare pdb.setTrace, and that would break you out of the script or whatever you're running into an interactive session where you can look at the variables up to that point, play with some of the code and step through it or jump to next functions, all the typical debugger type features. So this kind of just, instead of having to do that, it takes out a little boilerplate, and all you do is just declare breakpoint wherever you want a breakpoint to occur. So if you run this, you into the debugger session, and so if I wanted to view a variable, then there's my X, and you can step through it or just continue, and it'll go to the next thing. So just nice little feature in 3.7. Another, didn't show it here, but you can, if you have other debuggers installed on your system, if you don't want to use the one in the standard library, you can also set up the breakpoint function to call one of those instead of the PDB or IPython debugger, and that would just go in as a parameter in the breakpoint definition.
I'm not familiar with those, or is there like an environment variable or a command line switch that just automatically turns off all the breakpoints or turns them all on, so that you can kind of like not have to go have sort of a dev version of your code and a non-dev version of your code, the one with all the breakpoints commented out,
to where you don't have to comment them all.
If debug.
Right.
Yeah.
Just sort of turns them all into no ops.
I don't know. I try to keep track of where they are. I haven't gotten that fancy with it.
Just write another Python.
You could use PyCharm, just set the breakpoint in their debugger, and I have to declare them like this everywhere. Actually, there's a Jupyter Lab extension or plugin, whatever they're called, that came out not too long ago, where it's a graphical debugger in your Jupyter notebooks. So in the you can, just like in PyCharm or any kind of IDE, you can just select the line and set the breakpoint there.
So these breakpoints are, what's the advantage of these breakpoints if there's PyCharm?
Well, I just use Sublime Text, so I just set my breakpoint functions everywhere. Yeah, if you're using PyCharm, you probably don't want to use this. So, but if you SSH into a machine somewhere, and I guess you could do that with log in with PyCharm. I mean, I would usually, if you SSH into a computer in a terminal session, and
Going to use Emacs now.
maybe.
Maybe some first step in
Clearly, you're going to use Ed.
Yeah. So it's just, I don't know, I think any language should just have some kind of debugger by default. So this is Python's version of it.
So is this is in the runtime, or the Python run, when Python actually runs it, it will stop there. And
yeah.
And how do you make it continue?
So there's let's see, let me just run this again. So there's a bunch of commands you can give it, like C is continue. N would be go to the next line, or if you're in a function, jump out of the function and keep going from there, jump to the next function. There's all kinds of different commands you can give it. So you can print stuff out if you want while you're in there. And so you can see, when I ran this, it got to this point here. So that's why you're not actually seeing this returns, but if I just continue it, see the hello there. Just a really simple demonstration of it. This is really quick. So if you're not familiar, this is your good old-fashioned dictionary in Python with squiggly brackets, key value, pairs of key values. Previous to 3.7, if you had a dictionary, it's not showing here because this is in 3.7, but you're not guaranteed, like if you iterated through every item of this dictionary, you're not guaranteed that those items were in order. It would be all over the place. So now by default, all the dictionaries in 3.7 are in order. So if you need to rely on the index of something in that dictionary, then you can be assured that it is what it is based on how you declare that dictionary.
Is it sorted by key alphanumerically?
It's you can give it a sort. You can tell it to actually sort them by key, but by default here, whatever I say, whatever I define it, disorder it is.
It stays in the order you find.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it does have options too. Since all these keys are strings, you could sort those if you wanted to.
Did they mention any comment on now the use of ordered dicts, which now seem kind of be redundant features now?
What?
So ordered dicts are just
Oh yeah.
This is exactly what you are.
Yeah, well that gets back like the data class stuff I was showing earlier. Why would you use a NameTuple now if you could just use the data class and you have the features of the NameTuples and the class objects?
They're going to continue supporting those for like legacy.
Yeah. But I mean, like this, I could. Yeah. like data classes, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point it just maybe if they like Python 4, if they wanted to clean up all that old stuff, just get rid of it.
It's still got like log lookup time for some random element, like a dictionary. So they would have abandoned that.
I don't know.
Just write extra information.
And
More constant time.
It's still a hash function.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's all I have. We're gonna do a bunch of lightning talks, but I'm the only one that did once. That makes it for a real short presentation. So yeah, we'll just hang out.
Chris has to double up next time then, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
He's going to do his 3.7 stuff and the next talk.
Yeah, we're thinking maybe he could just dial in and do a remote presentation or something. Let him have his fun. Yeah, I'll show the. So if you want a much better explanation, just go to realpython.com and plenty of things to read. I know there was some questions about the async IO, and there's been improvements to the timing functions as well. I think Chris was going to talk about the new timing features. I think we're going to work on something later on for async IO demo and talk. A lot of people have been asking about that. So yeah, I would recommend reading this if you want a good overview of the main new features of 3.7. So that's it. Yeah.
What about updates? I assume you're going to that'll automatically update at some point. What about Windows? Do I have to take out 3.6 and put in 3.7?
I mean, you could do create a new environment and install it in like virtual environment or conda environment and install whatever flavor version Python in that, or you could.
But there's no automatic on Windows. It's got to be.
I'm not familiar on Windows. All I know, if I had to install it on Windows, I would just install Anaconda distribution. And that's what I did here. I just did conda install Python 3.7 and it handled everything for me.
If it's in Linux, make sure that you check that it's not the operating system. Sometimes the kernels, they either 2.6 the way they work. So any update, they mess up the whole thing.
Even on Linux, I think the easiest way would be to install Anaconda and install its own version.
Yeah, if you wait on Ubuntu, you'll wait till version 22.04.
Yeah, just you gotta build a virtual environment.
Yeah.
It's probably the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, it comes with both, so it should it has updated in the past, so it should update to this eventually.
I don't know. I use Ubuntu, but I don't. I know they pin it to a particular major version. I don't know if they'll keep rolling the minor versions, or if they'll say whatever 3.5 on 16.10, and then 18.10 will get 3.7. I don't know.
Probably a while though. Probably wouldn't do it so quickly.
Sounds like what other people said, you could always try and use Amazon Linux in the virtual machine. They've already gone through, so that's the door, or uses the own package manager.
Okay.
You just download the Docker image.
Yeah.
I've installed multiple versions of Python.
Yeah, for sure.
It's usually, what they'll do is they'll still have the base, for instance, Python 3 mapped to the core one for the one that they're using. So my version of Linux, my 3.6 is going to be my 3. I can install 3.7 unless I explicitly call 3.7 for an interpreter, or if I explicitly call it in the terminal. Yeah, I was thinking the backslash or whatever. slash lane, if I call it there, then I can get it, yeah, to get it to actually, then I can force it.
You can set up anyways too.
You could, but like you said, you don't really want to mess around with the other stuff, because if you change out that original Python 3 link over to 3.6 to 3.7, you could.
It wouldn't be replacing the bin or user bin links. It'd be in your home shell.
Yeah,
You can set up an alias, and then whenever you type Python, it goes to 3.7.
that would be probably the safer. But I also know that for my version of 3.6, they do point lists. The 3.6.4 to 3.6.6, 3.6.8 will probably happen before then you get to 3.7. So whenever I do my DNF updates, which is I'll get the, I guess, patch release, if you want to call it that. Undermine the patch release of that monitor, movie monitor, we'll update that as well. So it stays kind of in the same ballpark, but it doesn't make it too far. You have to explicitly start getting past those minor numbers and then start changing numbers.
All right. Well, just hang up. See you next month.
Apparently,